Let's draw flowers inspired by Kandinsky's concentric circles. For today's project, you'll need a piece of paper, a pencil, crayons, and something to outline. If you have two different materials that are different thicknesses to outline, like a marker tip and a thinner pen tip, that would be helpful as well. To get started, begin by deciding whether you want your paper to be vertical or horizontal. Now it's time to begin the centers of our concentric circles. We're going to make sure that they're about the size of our finger, and then we're going to stay about a hand width away from other circles and all edges. This will give us enough room for our petals without too much overlapping. Each time I draw a new circle, I'm going to grab a new color. Notice that with my crayon, I'm pressing down nice and hard and filling in all of my white spots so I can get a nice solid color. Notice that as I'm adding new colors, I'm working my way down and across the page. So I really want to spread these circles out nicely so that I have enough room to add all of my flowers. I would recommend doing only 5 or 6 flower centers. On the right here, you'll see that I've actually added 7. But I found that made it really difficult later when I added petals and I had a lot of overlapping of stems. So I would stick with 5 or 6. Now we're going to add another ring of color around each of our flower centers. Make sure that whichever color you choose is different than the first one that you used. So here you'll see I have a yellow and I'm adding a light green to the outside. You'll also notice that my rings are only about the width of a pencil or your pinky. We don't want them to get too big or you might not have enough room for your petals. Next, we'll add a third ring to each of our circles. Remember, each time we add a new ring, we're going to add a new color. You can repeat any of the colors you wish as long as they are not already used on that same circle. Now it's time to add a fourth ring. We're going to add a fourth ring to about 3 or 4 of our concentric circles. That way we will have 3 or 4 large circles and just a handful of smaller ones that can be small flowers or little buds. Now it's time to add our petals. When adding our petals, we're going to make sure we have radial symmetry, which basically means if you were to divide it into little pie slices, each slice would be the same. I've come up with a handout here for you that might give you some ideas for your petals. For the petals and stems, you'll want to use a pencil so that you can erase. However, I'm going to use Sharpie so that you all can see exactly what I'm doing. If you go straight for your typical petal shape, what you'll want to do is start by putting a petal at the top, then add one to the bottom, and then side to side. So top, bottom, side to side, and then fill in between. This will make sure that your petals are evenly dispersed around the center of your flower. Notice that each of my petals are at least the width of my finger. That way I can color them in later if I wish. You may also add to your flower by either putting shapes inside of your petals or in between your petals. And your options don't just stop there. You can add more layers and create more petals by adding simple lines and shapes. As you create your flowers, remember we're aiming for radial symmetry. Radial symmetry means circular symmetry. So you can imagine if this flower was divided into little pie shaped slices, each little pie piece would be the same. So whatever I do to one area, I'm going to go ahead and do all the way around. Some of your smallest circles can be turned into little flower buds by putting petals on only a small portion of the flower head. Make sure you think about where your stem will be coming from because you'll put the petals on the opposite side. Even something as simple as adding little dots to the outside of your flower centers can make it more interesting. As you are working today, make sure that you're adding your flower petals to the flower centers at the bottom of the page first and working your way up the page. And that is because those that are at the top are farthest away and those that are at the bottom are going to be closest. And this will come in handy for when we have petals that are overlapping. Now remember, as we go higher up the paper, we're going further back into space. So our centers that are higher up are going to be behind the flowers whose centers are lower on the page. So here you can see I'm going to go ahead when I overlap. I'm going to make sure that this flower center that's higher up is behind the petal lower down. So you'll want to remember that as you work today. Every time you have overlapping, think about which flower is higher up. That one automatically becomes in the background and its petals will go behind the petals around the centers, which are lower on the page. Now is a great time to add some line weight. You may choose to go back in and fill in some of your areas in solid black. You might also like to double up some of your lines or even outline with a thicker Sharpie. Remember, line weight is how thick or thin your line is. And depending on how thick or thin it is, it will give us a different value. Value is how light or dark something is. It will also give us some contrast. Contrasts are opposites. So in this case, we have light and dark. Now it's time to add our stems. The bottom of the paper is going to represent what is closest to us. Whereas when we are getting higher on our paper, things are getting farther and farther and farther away. So when we have objects on our paper that are overlapping, we are going to want the flowers that are lower on our paper to look like they're in the front. And this is going to be important to keep in mind when we draw our stems. The next thing we'll need to do is decide where the ground is going to be. We don't want our stems coming from every single direction on the paper. So make sure that you know which side of the paper is your ground And all of your stems are going to make their way down towards that one side of your paper. For me, it's going to be the bottom here. For the stems, draw 2 lines about a pinky width apart. On each flower, draw at least 1 or 2 leaves. If you have plenty of room, you can add more. This handout will show you a variety of different shaped leaves you can add. Try your best to do a different type of leaf for each flower. You'll also want to make sure that you start with the flowers at the bottom and work your way up. And that's because it'll be easier to figure out our overlapping when we do that. You may even want to add some lines or even broken lines to suggest the little ripples and veins on leaves. Some of your stems can even go diagonally or with a little bit of a curve, as long as they look like eventually they would make their way down to the same side of the paper as all the other stems. Notice how I'm sneaking this leaf in behind the other flower. That's because this flower is higher on the page and therefore is towards the background. Notice that part of my leaf goes off the edge of the paper. And that's okay. Sometimes a work of art is even more interesting if parts of the picture go off the edge of the paper. Don't forget to make sure that all stems go all the way to the bottom of the paper. After you have drawn your stems and leaves, go ahead and outline everything. Don't forget to have various thicknesses with your lines. Now for my horizontal piece going from side to side, I had a lot of space to spread out my stems. However, on my vertical or tall ways piece, my stems are really close together and there's a lot of overlapping. So what I'm going to do is, as I work today, I'm going to Sharpie my flower stems and leaves at the bottom, and then if it starts to get a little too crammed and clustered, I can always go in and erase a little bit in the middle as I work. Don't forget, you can fill in some of your leaves and your stems solid black. That'll help to push some of your flowers forward and pull some back. You could even split one and do half and half, white on top and black on the bottom. Now if you have a lot of room, like I did on this horizontal piece, you can even add filler towards the bottom, whereas on my vertical piece it was very crowded and I didn't need it. Examples of filler can be found along the left-hand side of the handout that I created here on the left. Here's my finished Kandinsky flowers. I hope you had fun creating yours.